about 25 years. And Reverend Hickman is not only the executive director of STAR, but she's also the community co-chair of the center's community advisory board. So she has actually been involved with the center longer than I have. She's been a really close collaborator with Dr. Cooper, and she's just phenomenal. And then of course you met Demetrius last week. Some of you had the opportunity to meet him. He is also a wonderful colleague and friend, works as the innovations manager at Sisters Together and Reaching. The three of us have had opportunities to work together developing collaborative care, community-based collaborative care interventions. And the reason why we asked them to come to talk about caregiver or engaging caregiver networks is because they established themselves as really being experts in that domain and actually teaching a lot of Hopkins affiliated providers how to do this. So they're going to structure their talk in a similar manner as what Randy did. So I will be their scribe, and it's going to be a conversation of just sharing the different experiences and expertise around the table. So without further ado, Reverend Deborah Hickman.
Thank you, Dr. Chidima. What a wonderful introduction. Good morning. It's really great to start a Monday off in such an arena as this and to look around the faces and see that there is integration of cultures and values and the like. And we are very elated to be here to share with you what we've observed, what we know, and what we need to glean from you as well as share with you. And so that's how we would like to actually talk about Patient Caregiver Network and what is our role as case managers, as the community health workers, and actually working with the patients and engaging them in a dialogue that will frame a network around them to help them be successful at being able to stay on their medications, make their appointments, and actually bring down their blood pressure and feel good about themselves in the environment that they're in. I believe that each of you might already have a case study on Mr. Jones, and we're going to use this as the basis of our conversation. If you don't have one, let me know. I do have a few more.
And for those of you who did not have it, we went through this case study last week during our case study training sessions.
And so for those that don't have it and for those that just need to review it quickly, would you do so now for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and move into one of the questions, my first questions that I have for you. If you've looked at your agenda between last week and before today, is what would you like for, to make certain that Demetrius and I lift up for you in the process of something that you will be able to take away and that you will be able to use as you continue to engage with the patients that will be assigned to you? So just take a few moments. God bless you. Has everybody had a chance just to glean over? So I'd like to open this up with, by starting where the patient is. I feel like the patient is not on the outside, but the patient is always center of everything that's taking place in their health care. If I were to design a diagram for you, and I'll ask Dr. eBay if she would do that, I would actually say that it would be a circle, and she's seen this diagram before, where the patient is always center of everything. Everything revolves around the patient. Nothing without the patient, but everything with the patient. That means that there should be no communication that is taking place just amongst us about the patient, but the patient should be engaged in the process, meaning that we know the patient. What we know about the patient came from the patient. That's what you see here. All of the information has been gathered from the patient. Is that correct? And so that means that the doctors, the physicians, the primary care provider, and then you also have the nurses, you have the pharmacists, you have the community health worker, and then you have also that person's family. But is family on the outside, or is family more, I would probably put another circle around here, around the family. Because the family, we're gleaning from Mr. Jones, who are his closest family members, and who is his social network. Those are the three circles that you will see gathered around the patient. Then on top, another circle around the family, and that's the social network. Those are friends, acquaintances that the family, Mr. Jones, can trust. So these are the first people that Mr. Jones reaches out to say, I went to the doctor today, and what I found out is that I have hypertension. And he begins his conversation about what the doctor recommended. Doctor recommended these hypertensive drugs that I'm not familiar with. And someone in the family might quickly say, man, be careful, because those drugs can impede your libido. Because that's the big issue for men. Okay? It's that issue of, am I going to be able to function like I used to function? And so someone in the family says, that's what caused Maureen and I to have to get a divorce, because I couldn't do what I used to do. And so you might want to think about it. Don't go there, man, don't go there. But then as you branch out into the social network, and he's telling somebody else that he has this hypertensive issue, then that person, he might have a good male friend that says, man, you know, yes, it hindered me in some ways, but I learned some things. I learned that if I go out and walk every day, if I exercise, that I keep my nerves intact. And so therefore, as I started to do those things, things started feeling like normal again. And so it was about giving that healthy information and not just the negative information that it's going to have a low impact. And also, then there's that person that be careful telling your wife, because then she might be like, oh, you know, I heard what happens to you when you take these hypertensive medications, and you want to be careful because, you know, they'll think that you don't have the manliness that you used to have. It gets framed in that way. So you have to understand the cultural dynamics, you have to understand the social dynamics, you have to understand the value system, and you have to understand spiritually, where is Mr. Jones? Because based on which denomination of his faith that he's walking in as well, all these things play into how successful Mr. Jones is going to be able to be in the process of taking this medication and understanding his diagnosis at this time. Do you want to add anything to that place right there? So you got this social network that continues to build out, but you have us as the providers that are circling the family, the social network, and Mr. Jones, and we are listening, but we are also doing what we're looking at the labs. We're looking at, the medications. We're looking at the nutritional part of it and all these things that all of a sudden have engulfed Mr. Jones. What are some of the things that you quickly note about Mr. Jones from the case?
He likes his fast food.
He likes his fast food.
He also likes his beer.
He likes his beer.
He doesn't exercise
He doesn't exercise
and rarely goes to the doctor.
and rarely goes to the doctors. Okay.
Struggles with affording medication.
He struggles with being able to afford the medications.
His work is his priority.
His work is his priority.
He's a recent divorce.
Medication education, because he doesn't take his medicines all the time.
He needs patient education around his medicine. Somebody said he's divorced, recently divorced, right? And now he's showing up at the emergency department or either at his doctor's office, and what's going on with him? Hmm?
Abdominal pain.
He has abdominal pain. I was like, I didn't read about the aneurysm.
Abdominal pain.
Okay, all right. He has abdominal pain. And what has he suggested? What is his own prescription? What did he do?
GERD.
Hmm?
He's thinking he has GERD and he's taking Maalox.
He's taking Maalox, but he doesn't tell anybody he has GERD.
Is this what we're adding to it, or is this what's in the case?
Well, some of it we don't have because it was on different slides. You know, 3 months, 6 months. We don't have that. They didn't print it out and gave it to us. But we're recalling some of the
Okay.
things that was on it.
I was just asking, because I remember how he died, what he did was, he felt that the hypertension medication was affecting his functioning.
Mhm.
So he stopped taking that, and then he had metformin, and he's reduced his intake to every other day because he thought it was giving him diarrhea.
Mhm. Probably it was. More than likely, when you start metformin, that's the big issue, is the gastrointestinal issues that you have. And so most men will actually stop taking it because they're like, this is not going to work. And it's an embarrassment, and then they go back to their provider, and their provider tells them that you have to take it because it's going to be this, this, or this. But what's missing in that conversation, if you come back to me as your provider, tell me that you're having severe diarrhea with this medication and you're also having some sexual dysfunction, and I said, well, you have to take this medication for X, Y, and Z. What was missing and what still is missing?
Well, individualizing it toward, first of all, when we dictate to patients what they have to do, nobody wants to be dictated to. They want to feel like you're listening to them and taking into consideration their concerns. I mean, he's throwing up the barriers, and the doctor just says too bad, well, that's not going to get anybody compliant.
I like the word you use, dictate. We
People
dictate.
feel dictated.
Normally, we dictate to patients, and so in order not to dictate, what is the best way to communicate?
It's just based on my understanding that we're having these issues. Let's take a look at your blood pressure medication and see what we can change. So it will be effective for you and not mess with your sexual dysfunction. Find out about the metformin. If the metformin is causing his stomach pain and giving him diarrhea, maybe prescribing something different to see how that works.
Okay.
Breaking it down like that to let the patient know that I hear you, I understand you. Let's see what else that we can do.
Okay, I still hear some dictation in there.
I would, invite the patient to have a conversation at that point and just, find out what is it that I can help you with, like what is most important to you to work on at this time, so say like, I'm sorry that the medication, or I hear that you're telling me the metformin is causing you to have some kind of like gastroenteritis problems. What would you like me to do to help you better manage your blood sugar, and you can sort of frame that same type of conversation around just generally like what, just find out what's most important to the patient in that time, and then just frame the conversation around what the patient believes to be most important to them. Well, as the provider, you know that some of the things that he's talking about is still pointing back towards a diagnosis that you want to help the patient with medically, but it's just sort of giving the patient that sort of power to feel like they are able to make a decision for themselves, or just say what they want in the situation.
Okay, so let me ask let me do one thing that I didn't do, get names. We all have names. Debbie, Demetrius,
Danielle.
Danielle,
Suzanne.
Suzanne.
Vanessa.
Cheryl.
Lauren. Mary.
Gloria.
You'll have to tell me again because I'm getting older, and so therefore, sometimes I might forget. But I want to interrupt just for the sake of time and to make sure that we get to the place where I want you to get. And where I want you to get is to have a solid framework of strategy from beginning to end, of even being able to come alongside the provider and suggest gently that we try this format to engage patients at the very beginning. What could the provider have done prior to making any prescription? And I'm going to go, tell me your name again.
Vanessa.
Vanessa.
I think he could acknowledge his concerns, like I hear your concerns. And I think that, instead of saying, well, you're gonna just have to go and do this medication, it's gonna, just being a dictator. And not, because a lot of times patients they want to be heard, and they want to be heard, and they want you to acknowledge that you're hearing, what their concerns are before you start spitting stuff back at them that they don't understand, because it's not going to develop trust for one thing, and they're not going to be in compliance at all. So I think coming up with something that works better for them and finding out what their tolerance is, what they're willing to do, because they don't have to take it.
Okay.
My thought was, when the doctor prescribed the medication, sometimes you have to prepare a patient ahead of time. And my thought was, when it came to the metformin, let him know that this is, there's loose stools, it's a potential problem, usually resolves after a certain amount of time. Give him explicit instruction. You may want to pad yourself, give the medicine a chance to work, and let them know they're unexpected. So sometimes you might think it's gas, and it's not gas. So you really need to, protect yourself. And this won't last for a couple of weeks, and we'll try it. And if it doesn't resolve, then we'll switch. But this is a good medication to work with it. And then when it comes to the medication affecting his sexual habits, you can let him know that sometimes this may happen, but if we work on your exercise, like we had mentioned earlier about getting your nerve endings reactivated and working, let him know we can work with that. And sometimes we can change or turn things around, along with getting your blood sugars under control, because it is a vessel that will help with your BD.
Okay.
So you can let a patient know this ahead of time, so when it happens, it's not like, oh no, and then he feeds on all the false information from the support system. So if you let him know ahead of time, that way he's not embarrassed.
Okay.
He doesn't have
So
any
pre-education.
Pre-education.
Pre-education. Suzanne, and then,
No, she would always
Okay.
say what I was going to say.
Well, he's not so high on his blood pressure, so I'd want to know how long he has been that way, because I somebody into a lifestyle modification option and a time period, then you have a goal. And you can, getting people to buy in is putting the onus on them to make that decision. We give people drugs all the time and they don't take them. And so you want them to, okay, we don't need to take medicine right now as your blood pressure's crept up. Here's what you need to do, and then make measurable time periods. Where in this study we're giving them blood pressure cuffs. Hopefully that is going to empower them when they see over the weeks that it's improving. They know when they've been bad on their diet. They know when they've been bad. And if they can engage into seeing that direct impact, then perhaps they will engage in goal, engaging, continuing to increase the good habits and decrease the blood pressure.
I concur, and I think that one of the things here that I really would like to be one of your takeaways from us is first and foremost, being proactive with our patients, with our clients. And if you're working in the doctor's office, showing the doctor how to be proactive by you taking the initiative to develop something for the patient. When patients come in and you know that they're going to be getting a diagnosis today of hypertension, of diabetes, of renal failure, that you have a little binder already put together for them with their information in it, and also setting up a time for them to actually engage in the education around the diagnosis. This should be set up as a initial appointment that they're getting ready to see their provider, and before they either see the provider or right after, before they leave that day, that they're going to engage in a session with others that might be going through the same process, to learn about hypertension, to learn about their diabetes, to learn about their renal function, and especially for men, to learn about erectile dysfunction. And that begins a pattern of communication, because then you're effectively engaging the patient. You're making the patient the center that you know nothing can exist in communicating without the patient knowing about it first. Even down to understanding lab values. You got a page in this binder that you're giving them that actually talks about what the LDH is, what are the normal levels, and why we want to monitor this, and the foods that cause your LDH to go up, and what can cause your LDH to come down. Those types of things are critical, because you're asking this patient to go back out and share with his family members and closest friends what's going on to help him or her to actually have a successful outcome with this, that they don't want to lose a leg, that they don't want to come in for a hospitalization, they don't want to have severe intestinal problems that they can overcome, that there is a nutritionist available that's going to be talking to you. We realize that we won't be able to get you through all of these pieces, because after 2 hours, actually we're burnt out, we're not really hearing, we're kind of cathartic and really want to get outside for some fresh air and do some other things, and we got system overload. And so you want to make certain of the communication, but you have a binder that's starting to say this, this, and this. But importantly, if you're going to start a patient on a new medication of any kind, you should always give the patient the options. What are the various options? And show compare the contrast of the 2 medications or the 3 medications that the patient is going to be on, so that they have something to look at and think about. Should this medication be taken early morning with my breakfast, or can I take it late at night? Is it going to cause me to be up and down all night long, going back and forth to the bathroom? As she just said, the first thing you note is that if his blood pressure, I think, is 146/89, if that's over 96, that's not a really high blood pressure. But is it something that you could actually give him hydrochlorothiazide to see if that's a beginner, instead of putting him on, I forget which drug it was.
He was on those because his diagnosis warranted it, because he also has coronary artery disease.
Okay.
And that warranted. So we had talked about. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
That's okay. And what I'm going to say is that initially, I'm talking about from his initial diagnosis,
Yes.
who spoke to him and gave him clarity, and that when he left the room before prescribing, this is where you have to make certain you're asking your provider, you're telling me these things, I can't make a decision today. I need some additional information, even down to, is this one for a case conference where you have the pharmacist, you have the nutritionist, you have the provider, you have the nurse, you have the community health worker, you have these people at a table such as this, having a discussion about what is really going to be best. And oftentimes, too often, our providers are making decisions in silos, and our patients do the same thing without having a whole team around. It's a team approach. It is not an individual approach. I have family and friends. I have a life and a lifestyle that needs to continue. So how do I make it so that when I go to the party, I'm still the life of the party, I still got that dance going on, and I'm still happy about life and not depressed about life. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration when a patient is making a decision. How we engage at the beginning, and if we're coming in the middle, how can we still engage to say, let's step back a moment and let's take a good look and make sure that we're on the right road.
I agree totally with what you're saying. When I get patients for case management services, I usually like to set the stage and sort of explain my role, explain why I'm going to be assisting the patient, explain why I need their help in my assisting them, and then on top of that, I educate patients. I educate patients a lot, and a lot of times they were like, oh, well, they didn't explain that to me. No one ever told me that. So I feel like with education, there comes power, and when you have the power, then you can sort of know what you're doing. So I feel like setting the stage initially, like you said, whether if it's a brand new patient, that's a really, really, really good time to sort of set the stage with regards to explaining who you are, your role, your relationship, and sort of telling the patient or explaining to the patient that your role is there to help them to have sort of achieve an optimum level of wellness. If there's a patient that you sort of get in the middle of their care, they're already a patient of your facility, but they never got around to seeing you, when you sort of meet with those patients, they might have already experienced the provider, they might have already had this experience, that experience, and their experiences has led to them sort of like missing key elements of why it's important for this to happen, or why we're doing this way, or why we're doing that way, or what these medications are actually doing to your body, and why it's important to take them for your particular condition. I feel like once you sort of get that patient and are able to reframe that and help put it into context for patients, they get it, and they really do a better job at coming to care and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So just thinking about what was just said in your experience, so let's say the patient comes in, like Mr. Jones comes in, and we know from the case study that he doesn't have the best relationship with his daughter. He does have a good relationship with his brother, and he's in the midst of a divorce. So let's say he brings his brother with him into that visit with his primary care provider, or even with his care manager. What are your recommendations for how to engage the brother in supporting Mr. Jones?
I think that it's a basic coming in with an education around his disease, of him really being able to sit through maybe a 20-minute film about, hypertension, diabetes, and erectile dysfunction, because those are his big issues. And helping his brother to understand that it's important for them to sit down and have meals together. That, the eating out part, the nutritional support that's necessary, how important it is to eat clean every day. And eating clean needs to be clarified, and eating clean can be expensive. But, culturally, eating clean greens means like, learning or leaving there with a recipe that says that you can take chicken broth and a little olive oil and add some very different kinds of peppers or whatever to that pot of greens, and you got the best greens that you ever wanted to taste. You never thought that greens could taste so good. And it's like you're not increasing his hypertension by adding the salt and the pork and all of that to that pot of greens. But you've now showed them, and even maybe having a taste test for patients to go through, seeing that what their normal diets look like can change. It's a change, but it's a change that decreases the cost of care and increases the outcome for the patient. So in the beginning, it might say, well, we're not here to run a cafeteria. But realistically, it is what will get us to the place where Mr. Jones is going to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So by educating and creating this caregiver support system, making sure that Mr. Jones's brother leaves out of there with a binder that's set up to say that has all of the information about his providers. It also has in there times that his brother can spend with him, you know, mapping out for his brother to look at his own calendar and say, these are the days that I can have a meal with you.
See, but I still think that you haven't dug down into what he eats at fast food. See, I think you have to keep going down till you've got down the level till you are on the same level with him.
I agree.
He might go to fast food because he gets a free meal out of that manager for sweeping the parking lot every Sunday. And you've got to figure out then how to help him pick that McDonald's meal that's healthy for him. Like, I don't condemn anybody for any choice that they make.
Right.
Because that's the same thing that the doctor's doing by saying, bad, you must take drugs. You know, like, I have to find out where it's going wrong, on what path is he walking, so I can help him pick the branch in the road that's more.
I agree with you, Susan. I think that what should be included are the do's and the don'ts. What you pay attention to if you're going to be eating out.
Yeah.
What you know, the types of food and how you know, ask the questions about where you're getting your food from. The big issue with hypertension and diet is processed food.
Yeah.
And so McDonald's is not the place where you want to, but if you had to,
Right.
what can you eat that's going to be healthy and not get you into an issue? Ruby Tuesdays is not the healthiest place
Right.
to go, but if you're going to go, how do you know ahead of time what they have on the menu that you've already agreed with yourself about
Right.
to eat? So it's the do's and the don'ts that go into the binder that you are agreeing to. And then understanding that there are restaurants out here now that offer fresh farm delivered food that prepare. However, you also pay a price for it. And so it's those types of things that need to be included and incorporated in both his, Mr. Jones's personal binder and now his brother's binder. And then if Mr. Jones's brother can identify other people in their family or their social circle that should be included in helping him to have and maintain this healthy diet. Are there people that are willing to prepare meals for him to be able to pull out of the freezer and be able to eat still fresh food? So those are the types of things. I think that you're right on point. These are the things that need to be in that binder, but a calendar needs to be in there because everybody that's engaged in Mr. Jones's care needs to be able to point up concretely for Mr. Jones, because it seems like he's depressed. He has what is it there, PHQ level is 6.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I noticed last week that no one touched on the fact that he was borderline, he's on the border
Yeah.
and needs extra support.
He needs that extra support, and because right now, for, you know, and we need to find out what's causing it. And it seems like it focused around his wife. It focused around the fact that he was having some erectile dysfunction, and now he's left alone, and now he's got to set up this new lifestyle of living. He's concerned about his mother, who is 70 years old, who's probably concerned about him. So his stress levels are going up. He's concerned, God bless you. He's concerned, he's concerned also about the fact that he now doesn't want to miss time from work because this is going to stress even more so. He's concerned about his relationship with his daughter and who's paying attention to making certain that he is getting some good mental health care in this process. As you say, it requires the digging down even further. How do we get to this place? And at some point, where do we bring the daughter in to understanding her dad? And is it in the doctor's office, or now do we add the spiritual setting? What are his beliefs? And how can his spiritual family come alongside and bring mediation between the two of the dad and the father? It seems like he has pretty good relationship with his wife, even though they've gone apart. But there is an issue here that's driving a lot of his problems and keeping his blood pressure up. And also, I don't know what his final diagnosis was about the abdominal pain, but he's got some major issues going on, and they require a provider. They require a team that really is caring about him intimately to the extent where he begins to care about himself. A daily walk. Who can be out and take a daily 20 to 30-minute walk with him every day? Who can introduce to him lifting weights? Not lifting heavy weights at the beginning, but gently starting to lift weights, you know. Weights, you know, a lot of people don't understand if you've been diagnosed as pre-diabetic or you're a diabetic, that going and making sure that you're getting 3 days of strength training and will actually help you to reduce the medication that you actually go on and maybe get you off of it. But for men, it is critical for them to have that space where they can talk about the erectile dysfunction and get their muscle back. And it should be in a place where they're not just talking with men, but they're talking with men and women. Because sometimes we think that sex is the big thing that cannot go away. But sex doesn't start downstairs, it starts upstairs, and it matters as to what you do and how you do it to engage. You know, Demetrius is laughing. So,
Tell it to a room full of men. Tell it to a room full of men.
tell it to a room full of men, and I think that that's what women need to do. We need to help men to understand that we respect them with or without an erection. And that is a critical place. It's a conversation that we all need a good sex education and how to do a sexual assessment to make certain that we are engaging the whole of the person and not the part of a person. It's good when a woman can go to the doctor's office with her husband or he can go with his, partner. However it goes, it's just important dialogue, a dialogue of understanding. Now what else can we do to really have fun in the bedroom? To really keep things afloat, to really make me feel like I still got that muscle. I'm the man, or I'm the woman, and nothing, we hear all kinds of things in the community, the cultural, conversations, the value systems, and we need to put it all in perspective now because we want to continue to live. And that is the real bottom line. We want to have a quality of life that's like none other, no disruptions. This thing thinks that it has me, but I have it and I have it under control. That's what we're trying to drive the patient to. Demetrius, I've been doing a lot of talking.
You have. I'm just, I'm listening. You're touching everything, really. Don't know where to jump in.
So I have an idea of something that I would really like for you to share about with the group, which is when we were implementing Tumaini, or even in your observations of the J-CHIP program, what were the most successful strategies you used to engage a patient like Mr. Jones? So we talked a little bit about it, like you provide education around their condition, not just to the patient, but to the caregiver. And then you encourage that caregiver to support the patient, whether it's lifestyle modification or social and emotional support, making sure that the caregiver has a sense of the patient's care team, which I thought was a great idea. A lot of times, patients don't even have a sense of their own care team, let alone their friends and family being aware of it. And asking the caregiver, in this case Mr. Jones's brother, who else in the family could help Mr. Jones. Do you have, so when you, what were your best practices in terms of initiating caregiver support and then supporting the caregivers as well?
So going into a patient's home, the first thing is to sit down and do a total assessment. In that assessment, it identifies your family members, it identifies who are your immediate people in the family. It identifies the fact of whether or not there are people that will be able to care for you if you can't care for yourself. It identifies your nutritional habits. It identifies if you have any behavioral issues relative to substance abuse, alcohol use, and or mental health issues. It identifies your household income. It identifies whether or not you're currently working or not working. It identifies your triggers. What are the things that keep you in the emergency department? What are the things that keep you going or continually being admitted? It gives geographical demographics of where you're living. It goes through your finances.
It helps to identify those things that are going on in the home that are keeping you out of your doctor's. Who else can see your doctor?
Your religious or spiritual values. It also, we conclude with asking you to identify your top 3 priorities and getting to a good place in your diagnosis. Want to leave it out? Demetrius, you can pick up.
So after we do that assessment and we do help them to identify those family members or even a neighbor who can assist them with these things or assist them in going to the doctor's appointment with them that they can understand what's going on in the doctor's office. What we also have done is we offer the caregivers a support. Where we invited the caregivers themselves because we know the caregivers, they go through a lot of things themselves. They have family issues, they have health issues. So what we did was we invited them into our office for a caregiver support group. And this support group is not guided by us, but guided by them. We gave them, you know, the floor to say, okay, let's have this monthly, let's have this quarterly, let's talk about these issues. And so the first one we had was very powerful. I call it powerful because we had a support giver, a caregiver, who just recently lost her husband within a year. And so she was caring for a neighbor of hers. And so she broke down, and so the other caregivers at the table were able to give her support and just share, you know, different ideas with each other. And what we did was we offered educational materials for them, and we can offer, you know, ask a physician to come in and talk to them about various diseases, illnesses, and then also offer them resources that they can use for themselves and help them in their role as being a caregiver for their family member or loved one.
And resources are really critical because what we see a lot of is that people don't have adequate transportation, they don't have adequate co-pays, they don't have enough food to get them through a month because of the fact that they might have a low income or have limited income coming in, that they don't understand their providers, and oftentimes their caregiver network might not be available to go with them to their appointment at the same time because of the fact that they have appointments set up themselves. But what we've also discovered is a lot of the caregivers needed care themselves. So you're not only setting up a caregiver network for the patient, with the patient, but you're also then beginning to work with the caregiver and the caregivers network. And so it kind of like spirals out. And you'll say, well, I'm only responsible for the patient. But however, if you're going to be responsible for the patient, you end up touching every part of that patient's life. And so therefore there is not one part of it, but there's the whole of it. And so, you know, setting up and making sure that we're engaging them around their availability and not our availability. So if they say that they're not available until 6 p.m. to come for a group, then 6 p.m. we have that group. If there's another group that says that I can do it between 10 and 12, then we got 2 groups going on because we're trying to make sure that we're as accommodating as we can possibly be. But the bottom line comes down to what do you leave them with to help them? And like Demetrius says, teaching them about the disease entity, teaching them about adherence and why medication compliance and compliance with their doctor's appointments, compliance with their social service appointments, compliance with letting someone know that they're running into financial difficulty. We have even engaged Johns Hopkins in having their financial hierarchy come to us and asking the patients and their families to bring in their concerns. Well, Demetrius can tell that story of the first one.
So I have a client story. I have a client who she shared with her community health worker that she would like for her community health worker to come into the physician's office with her because she felt as though the physician was talking to her, was talking at her and not getting her engaged, and that her physician, well, she felt as though her physician was prejudiced. And so she has shared with her CHW that, you know, she loves wine, that she likes to have a glass of wine with, speak up for herself. So the patient spoke up for herself and said, listen, I don't drink malt liquor, this is wine that I have, you know, with dinner. And so, and then the CHW support, by the patient finally, you know, started to be engaged with her own health care. She started going to the physician on her own. She could actually sit and speak to her physician. And she noticed, you know, after going and everything, that this was not the best physician for her. So she was able to help, you know, the CHW was able to help her find a new physician, and she's been doing good on her own, where she can understand what's going on with her health. She's taking her medications. She's able to ask her questions about her medications. And so that's one of the...
But relative to the financial piece of it, on the night that we had the dinner for them, we were surprised that we had a large number of caregivers and our clients come out. One, I think she was in her 80s, that came with a bag of bills. They avoid answering the telephone when they see Johns Hopkins number come up. And so we put on a very nice meal from Zanino's Catering. I'm saying this for Chittama right now, with, you know, a great nice pan of lasagna and a salad and one meatless and one with meat and just the whole shebang. It was really a nice evening, and the room was filled. One, they came with shopping bags filled with their bills. And Hopkins appreciated the fact that they came out with questions, concerns, and they were able to articulate, but they also learned how to get their medical bills under control that were controlling them. And I think that it's critical for us to also understand, or always understand, what actually are those triggers? What are those things that are setting you on fire? Learning from clients that, you know, they get their medications, but their family members are taking their medications because they have family members that believe their medications can be sold on the street as a form of drugs. And so trying to bring some income into the house. But we also, you know, identify the resources that help them with their finances by making sure that once a month we take fresh vegetables and things to them that are donated to the Amazing Grace Church. And so we go there and get like almost a U-Haul truck full of fresh vegetables and things, fruit, and sometimes some meats would come with it. But they're proud and honoring of taking those types of things. So I think, you know, best practices are making sure that you also show them how to document their concerns and when are good times to call your provider to let them know you're having gastrointestinal issues, when are good times to say that you are really having severe headaches and you really feel uncomfortable at night, or when you wake up in the morning, you can't just jump right up because your head is busting, and those types of things. How to take your blood pressure. Having classes for them where they learn how to take each other's blood pressure and know how to read and how to report. Questions that you might have around communicating with patients. Someone I haven't heard from.
I appreciate the fact that you're bringing in the caregiver and in one of the doctor's visits, because I think it's important for caregivers to hear from the doctor explaining to the patient and kind of observe in regards to what that interaction is, one. And then two, just so they have an understanding in regards to what the support group can be, what the support group can offer, just resources that the office can offer, or putting out their care management community workers. Because a lot of times it's not even touched on the first visit. So thank you.
Anyone else?
Can I add something? So what we found was beneficial because this is all about communication. It's about the patient. So we have to listen to our patients. And we found that a lot of patients, they don't listen in their home. So if they want to meet you at Burger King to talk, if they want to meet you at Panera to talk, do that. If they want to meet you at the park and sit on a park bench to talk, I would say do that. Anything that can help us to have that open communication to the system. I just wanted to add that.
And the big word is with, and it's not about what I want. It's making sure that you have moved your values. Your value system does not count in this scenario. It is the patient's value system. It is the understanding and acknowledging their value system, their culture, acknowledging where they are and where they're not. And we become the champions. We become the champions because we're listening and we are working from the perspective of that we are giving you our solid attention. We are listening with our ears. But how else can we listen? The eyes, we listen with our eyes because we are looking around and we are feeling the pain of the patient because we look up and we see there's a hole in the ceiling and it's leaking water, drip by drip. We are listening with our eyes as we look around and see that every time we come to the house, there are no lights on. So, and the patient doesn't want to tell you that their gas and electric is off, or that they're, using lamps in the evening and those types of things. We're listening with our eyes when we observe that whenever we come in the house that there are, young people in the house, but nobody is really caring for the patient. And the patient is feeling like, I want to tell you that I'm being abused, because we did have a patient that was being abused in the home, but they could not talk or did not feel comfortable in the house. Understanding that every assessment does not have to be done in a home, because there are sometimes in some needs when patients are stuck. Nobody is talking to them, nobody's taking them out on a walk, they don't feel safe to go out on a walk, and they feel like they're being watched in the home. So these are all things that you have to listen, not only with your ears, but you have to listen with your eyes, and you have to understand with your heart what is now required and how you get that patient to a place to take a walk down the street. You're becoming that patient's closest, advocate, and they need to know and they need to hear from you. The other things that you can do or should do is always make certain that the patient knows how to reach back to you. In the event that they are actually being maybe sent, they have to go to the emergency department and they can't communicate who you are. We had these cards that we gave out that had each of our names on it and a phone number and the primary care provider's name and number as well, so that they could present it to the clerk that was registering them to notify that in the event that I'm in the emergency department or that I get admitted, that please notify these 2 or 3 people, inclusive of the case manager. If they needed, if they had complaints about transportation, and transportation complaints are a big complaint, as to who they could call, and we even went as far as getting a new transportation system put in place with different providers. And that was in conjunction with Johns Hopkins. They gave us that capacity to do those things. But
And also telephone.
and telephone, we gave them telephones so that they were directly, the only calls they could, that they were programmed. These phones were programmed just specifically to call your provider, to call your community health worker, and the case manager, and whoever was on your care team. Those are some other things that we did.
And some of the things that you mentioned are part of the study protocol. Like, I really appreciated the point you raised about patient education materials and providing that to the patients, because when Demetrius last came, he and Lee Bone went through some of that with the CHWs, and that's what Katie and I are going to talk about with the care managers today. Just becoming acquainted with the patient education materials so that you can hand them out to the patient or the caregiver. But some other things that are really great, we might not be able to do, like providing patients with phones.
Yes, that depends on whether or not you are It's in the grant, and
Right.
it just happened to be in our grant at that time. And so, some other ways though are to check the resources. There's a caregiver network out of Bayview, and we're putting together a really powerful, resource tool that you would be surprised that if you go to a patient's home and you find that they're senior and they have limited income and they have a hole in the roof, or when you go out, you are coming up the steps and you find that the rail is shaky, we can get those things replaced. It's a matter of making sure that you have all of the tools at your disposal. Baltimore County, along with Baltimore City and others, have put together a really nice directory that we should have brought around here for you to see, that has a plethora of every kind of resource there is. And do we have some in the office that we could bring around? We'll make
Give
sure.
electronically?
Then, I don't think that it's electronic, it's in paper format, but it might be, I'm just not familiar with it.
And then when I was talking to the CHWs last week, you guys have access to Healthify?
Some of them do, not
Okay.
total health care.
Okay.
We'll make sure that you get copies. I'll ask Demetrius to bring it around when he comes. But also, I would say that one of the greatest treasures that any patient could have is a team that talks to each other, a team that respects each other, and a team that, actually makes certain that the information that they get about a particular patient, you always make sure that each person knows it. The care managers on the team are super people. They're the people that, we depend on as the community health workers to keep us educated and informed. And I think that as we're taking the information out to the patient, you also want to know where is the patient before you give them the information, where are they after you give them the information, so the next visit you go, you don't cram them with too much stuff at once, because then it's not digested appropriately. But that you are actually helping each other to build the best scenario and the best support system for this patient that you could possibly build. Questions or concerns? The food smells delicious. Looks great.
Do you, have a grant or some type of way of giving patients scales?
So-
Scales for, is that fluid and?
So the last grant that we had, we were able to acquire some things. At this moment, we don't have that built in, but we do have a little bit more flexibility as we move into our second year of the HSCRC grant. That we can, potentially do that if we need to. But I think blood pressure cuffs and scales in the patient's homes are some things that you can advocate. Being an advocate for your patient is a big to-do. So that means reaching out to Walgreens. Walgreens and CVS have become, great supporters of, responding to some things that they could give you to help the patient do some things. So.
And every patient will receive a home blood pressure cuff as part of the study. That's what is going to take place in that first intervention visit that we talked about, where the CHW is supposed to give that to the patient. And if the patient is subsequently stepped up to receive additional services and support from the community health worker, the community health worker will monitor the patient's progress with measuring. And Joe brought up an excellent point last week too, which is that in the event that a patient isn't stepped up, the care manager can help monitor the patient's use of the home blood pressure cuff too. The only thing that we don't have is the weight, the scales. We're not able to get that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be so big on the scale, because scales have a tendency to cause us all, when we're trying to maintain weight and whatnot,
Well,
to get
congestive
off
heart
track.
failure patients, it's a have to.
Huh?
Congestive heart failure patients,
Yes.
it's a necessity.
It's a necessity for them because of the fact that their
But
water
a lot of them
intake,
don't do it.
yeah, their fluid intake does matter. But if they don't have it, and even the other scale that I think is a necessity that helps the patients are the food scales, because it helps you to weigh out your amount of, your ounces of meat and or vegetables and things of that nature. But I think that, we don't want a system overload, but we want to gently introduce each piece on it, and we ourselves want to know what the diagnosis is and so how can we sit down and craft something that's really nice and that the patient also feels like a hero at the end of everything that's done. Any other questions, comments, observations?
will this is a question for Chiden, sorry. If the total health care personnel, if they get IDs, will they have access to Healthify?
No,
No, okay.
Healthify
I
is,
don't know much about it. Sorry.
yeah. For those of you who don't know what Healthify is an online platform that allows you to look up resources, and it's something very similar to Yelp. So you would type in what specific resource you're interested in, and it would generate a list of all of the different organizations that you could call to link your patient up to that resource. There have been some, I'm curious to know what people who use Healthify think of it, because I've always heard mixed feelings about it, which is part of the reason why we decided not to go with that and just keep with 211, or encourage people to use 211, because I think 211 can be just as helpful as Healthify.
Yes.
Actually, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, 211 or 311, depending
Oh,
on the
thank
county,
you.
no, that's
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
is more specific in regards to the county resources. Healthify, and they're more up to date, the 211, 311. Healthify, you can do a search and you might be doing food pantries in the zip code, but you could get something else in regards, you could get like grocery stores as well as food pantries. So sometimes the search isn't as specific as you want it to be, and not all the time the information is updated. So when I use it, when Lauren uses it, we call that resource first to make sure that they're still available. Especially if hours are involved. You know, here it says you're Monday through Friday from 8 to 4. They could say, no, we're Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 to 2 now. So, I mean, it's good, but there's still some bugs that they're trying to work out in the system.
Yeah.
I was telling Demetrius last week as well, if a patient has multiple barriers, Healthify isn't good at detecting multiple barriers.
It is
It
not
just gives
good.
you a more general
Yeah.
resources, I feel like.
Yeah, thank you both for weighing in. The experience that I've had with Healthify is very similar to what you just said. I worked with a community association that was trying to use Healthify to do outreach in their specific neighborhood, and they encountered a lot of those same types of problems. So that was why and they're also expensive, quite frankly. So that was the major reason why we decided not to incorporate it into the Rich Life project. But it is an interesting, it's a great idea, and like Mary said, they're still working out the kinks. It's a very young company, so
And
hopefully
it's a
they'll.
company that
Yeah.
actually needs, I'm sorry, Chima, it's a company that actually needs to know its neighborhoods, and it doesn't know its neighborhoods, it doesn't know the resources, and so they're searching out people like myself and other organizations for us to give them the resources that we've worked hard for, but they're getting paid for, but they're not paying back. And so therefore, 211 and 311, if you want me to give you, 25 years of resources that we've developed and the ability to know whether or not these services are still intact or not, then you need to pay for the services because you've been paid to deliver the services. And so that's the other part of it. 211, 311 are good places. But I also want to leave you with Call to Caregivers Network. And in the Call to Caregivers Network, you will find that there's a wealth of things. There's a 7-week course that's offered at Johns Hopkins Medical.
Can you please, is that a website?
Yes, it is a website.
Okay, can you say the name again?
It's, you want to go to Call to Care.
Call to Care?
Called to Care.
Oh, Call.
To Care, and it can be found at, you can find it on www.hopkinsmedicine.org. And just put, yeah, you got it right there, Call to Care.
Oh,
And
just put it in the search?
Yes,
Okay.
Call to Care. And they offer supportive services coming together with caregivers. We offer, and I say we because I'm a member, yeah. We offer the 7-week education series on Call to Care for caregivers, the community partnerships, the newsletter and calendars, and there's twice a month we have a call with different doctors and or nurse care providers and the like. And you can get your clients on those calls if it's around Alzheimer's, if it's around diabetes, hypertension, nutrition, getting caregivers to know how to take care of themselves, which we didn't spend any time on that. But it's important for caregivers to also understand how to take care of themselves, back to that concept of developing a calendar, because some caregivers get into a really bad place with their own care because they cares. No, other people care, and you need to allow them to care for you and care for your family member as well by setting up that calendar and setting up and knowing what are the things, the strengths that people can bring. I'm the cook, so I don't mind preparing you 3 days worth of meals every week so that you will have good food in the house to eat. I'm the person that can go with you to your doctor's appointment because I've retired now and I have time on my hand. I just need to know the calendar and I need to exchange my calendar with yours. And my backup person will be this person. So it's almost like you're bringing everybody into a room and you're having a potluck supper around this one person to get the pathway together of how you're going to get the person from point A to Z. So with that said, I'm standing between you and lunch. Thank you very, very much for having us.
Thank you.
And we wish you big success.
Please help yourself to the lunch as well.
Oh.
Yes.
I would love to take that salad with me. Thank you all.
I'll still see you later.
You can stay here.
Actually, this is a great question. Oh, yeah. Actually, this is a great question.
I mean, someone may have added it.
I said, and when you go on the second call,
It'll give you those three spaces, so there might be a thing for So, because people do that, so that your information, like, yeah, makes sense.
It wants to
So
jump
you
in?
should display the page.
It wants to jump in?
And
I'm feeling like
I'm gonna be.
All right.